Now, I want to go now to an annual survey that was released yesterday. It's done out of the University of Canberra, and it looks at the digital news scene in Australia. Leading this survey is Assistant Professor in Journalism at the University, Dr. Caroline Fisher. She joins me from Canberra now. Thanks for joining us, Caroline.
Hi there, Chris.
This is, you've been watching this for a while with an annual survey, obviously, but a bit of a landmark finding this time around in that you've discovered for the first time more than half of us are getting most of our news and information online rather than offline.
Yeah, the shift to online is happening globally, and we're part of that trend. So increasingly people are getting their news from online sources. Last year, in fact, we found that we all access news from a range of sources, but increasingly we are getting them from online sources. Yeah,
that graphic there we're looking at on screen shows the Australian figure there just to the left, the global average just to the right, but Australia there getting up to 57% online as against 43%. So it's in keeping, I suppose, as you say, with global trends. But what are the implications of this? What does it matter whether we get our news online or offline?
Well, it has big implications for the way that the news media funds itself. So the shift to online has been the root cause of the financial instability of the news media, not just in Australia, but in the world, because it's moved. The advertising dollars have shifted to where the eyeballs have gone. So if they've gone away from print newspapers and they've gone to online websites, well, then the advertising dollar has moved away. And so that has significant implications for the financial well-being and the future planning for the news media in Australia and across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, that's the massive practical implication for the media business and how to stem the flow of advertising dollars to online. The other side of that, of course, is where those advertising dollars now go to online. They're not actually feeding the content production, are they? The advertising dollars are going to Google and to Facebook, not to the media organisations that produce the information they feed on.
Yeah, and this is effectively a crisis, really, for news organisations everywhere, and it's the focus of investigation by the ACCC here in Australia, and they're about to bring down their report with recommendations on how to deal with that, and it's an issue that's being looked at by governments around the world.
Yeah, and media executives too. There's everybody in the media in the world is trying to come up with the magic formula. But
right.
So we'll put that to one side. I'm going to come back to that issue in future weeks anyway. But that is a real commercial crisis for the media industry. But what about for news consumers? What about for journalism, for public debate? What difference does it make? I mean, one obvious difference to me is that when you're consuming your news through social media, sure, you can get access to some of the best media in the world, and a lot of it is free, provided at taxpayer expense and the like. But it's cheek by jowl with absolute dross, right? It comes up in your feed with fake news, with very tendentious news, with activists pushing a line. There's very little curation of what's in there.
Well, there is a lot of curation that's in there. It just depends on the algorithm, and it may, and how much care that the individual user takes to carefully curate their own feed. It may be that they use their Facebook platform to consume news, in which case they might curate it so that they prioritise news over, messages from friends. I mean, you can manipulate it in certain ways to maximise news content. But what it means is that there is a lot of news in amongst everything else. And in fact, what we're seeing with this shift to online is that fewer and fewer people are going directly to news and going directly to news websites. What we're seeing is what's called indirect access. So, yes, they are bumping into news while they're doing other things. So while they're on their Facebook feed or trolling through Twitter, trawling through Twitter, I should say, not trolling through Twitter, although they might be doing that too.
They'll be doing both of it, no doubt. But the interesting thing here is you talk about curation. Yeah, I mean, theoretically, this is the great democratisation of the media, and I can curate the feed and get all the stuff I want. If I want to, I can see full transcripts of interviews and full videotapes of interviews, so I don't have to rely on journalists picking out the good bits. So that's all there. But, of course, in real terms, we tend not to do that. And as you say, what's being curated is according to algorithms largely driven by commercial imperatives, throwing up a car because I clicked on a particular car site, or throwing up holidays to a particular location because I wanted to find out what the capital of that country was, and maybe even political agendas behind that, unstated.
Look, very possibly. I mean, people, clearly it tracks your behaviour, and so if you follow a politician or you like something, that's right. So it remembers that and it builds that into the formula and the preferences of information, whether it be ads or news stories or whatever that it sends your way, as well, of course, by the activity of your other wider network of your friends, etc. So it has changed the way we do consume news and the types of news that we see. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that we're seeing less news, and it could also mean that some people who are relying on online or social media for their news, they may actually be accessing a wider range of brands that they were before. People who primarily read newspapers or watched TV, they may have only watched one TV channel,
yep.
and so receive news from one source, one brand. So actually, some of the evidence shows that people who are online may well be accessing a wider range of brands than in the previous, offline era.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a matter of how much time you got. It's information overload, and there is so much junk around as well. Let's just have a look at what this is doing to trust in the media, because you've tracked those sorts of things, and we've seen that the levels of distrust in the media have grown, and you're also getting increasing numbers of people who actually, therefore, avoid news altogether. They don't want to see the news. They don't want to be involved in this negative stuff.
Yeah, look, it's true. Avoidance of news has increased over the last 2 years. We asked that question in 2017, and we've asked it again this year, and off the top of my head, I think it's about a 6% increase over that time of people who say that they sometimes, often or occasionally avoid the news. And, yeah, people who are worn out by news, they are much more likely to avoid it. So, a bit of news fatigue certainly has something to do with that. People who trust news are less likely to avoid it. So all of these perceptions of news performance, how well it's doing, do have an impact on how much people choose to engage with it.
Cheapers, they got news fatigue. They ought to stand in my shoes for a week or two. What annoys me often...
I actually was surprised at how low it was.
Exactly. It's partly a factor, too, of how lucky we are to live in this country. The news, compared to a lot of countries, is quite sublime. But tell us about where all this is going. Like that major media companies, the offline media companies, whether it's free-to-air television stations, whether it's newspapers, radio stations, of course, they supply an enormous amount of the material now that goes online, and they're busy building their brands there and trying to monetise that. Where's all this going, though? We've seen so many job losses in the media. We've seen a lot of regional newspapers shut down. People are worried about where that local content's going to come from. What is the future? Looking at your annual survey and the trends, what is the future for the media now?
Well, look, we have seen increasing concentration in Australia, particularly when, Fairfax was taken over by Nine. But we have seen a new entrant, with Catalano buying up the regional stable of papers, so that's, broadening ownership a little bit there. What we are seeing is that trust, the main news brands, the ABC, the Australian, the well-established brands that were offline brands, the trust for those has translated over into the online sphere, and the audience has moved with them. So those brands that were really well-established offline are having greater success online. We're seeing, though, increasing numbers of online-only brands, and in fact, I think we saw an announcement this week of a whole range of local online offerings coming out of news now. But they'll be behind paywalls, and I think one of the things that's really telling about the report, of course, you can have all the news that you want, but are people prepared to pay for it? And only 14% of news consumers are paying for news in Australia. That's very close to the global average, so it's not unusual there. But people find bumping into paywalls very annoying, and there's not been a lot of shift in the number of people willing to pay. So have we reached peak paywall? I don't know, but I suspect we might have.
Yeah, well, I hope you're wrong there. I hope you're absolutely drastically wrong there. People have got to pay things. You can't get something for nothing, and there is a lot of free dross out there, as you say. We've got to just...
But we've always had a lot of free news in Australia. That's not new. The fact is...
No, well, you're right. Well, free-to-air television's got the same problem. Yep. No, you're right. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, speaking about online, I read a hard copy of your report, but I presume people can Google it and find it online?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go to the News and Media Research Centre, they can find it.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your time, Caroline.
Thanks, Chris.
That's Dr. Caroline Fisher there from the University of Canberra. As she said, you can Google that via the University of Canberra and read it yourself. Some interesting trends in there. Really strong commercial challenges facing all of the media around the world, but it's important for all of us in terms of what information we get, our access to truthful, honest, diverse information.